Welcome. Everybody having fun at Inforce? Learning a lot? Awesome. Well, today we're here to talk about how AWS Partners use observability to strengthen customer security. My name is Jacob Abbott. I'm the global lead for our partner Cloud Ops business.
So, my name is Austin. I'm a security SA. I work with our strategic account group and a lot of our partners. So, great to have you here. And over to you, Jake.
Thank you. So today we're going to talk a little bit about AWS Cloud Operations Overview. What does that mean? What does the competency look like? Monitoring observability with AWS and security observability on AWS. Just curiosity, how many of you all have heard of the Cloud Ops competency or the Cloud Operations competency? Couple? Has anybody heard of competencies at all? Who doesn't know about competencies? So everybody knows about them? Okay. So competencies, oh, sorry, my voice is gone already. Competencies are a way for us as AWS to look at partner offerings that we can vet and audit based on customer use cases. So under Cloud Operations umbrella, we have 5 solution areas. The first one being cloud governance, cloud financial management, monitoring, observability, compliance and auditing, and operations management. All of these play a critical role in security and really are the foundations for having a good cloud architecture. Within the competency, we took those customer use cases that we've heard from customers through our sales teams, through what we see in the market, as what are the things that you all ask the most about. And underneath of each of those segments or solutions, we have roughly 40 use cases that can talk about network management, AI ops, data management, and anonymization. All of these things that partners are audited and vetted for. So if you're a customer looking for a partner that can help you with centralized risk management, we've already done auditing on those partners, and those can be found on our competency website. On the other side, for our service path partners, think of more of the consulting folks, right? The GSIs and the SIs out there. These folks have to go through a pretty significant audit of each of these solution areas. So for cloud governance, they have to fit all 4 use cases to be able to be certified for that solution. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Austin.
Hey, everyone. Just checking my audio. Looks good. So we're all here to talk about observability. I figured it'd be logical to start with the services we offer in this space. I will say it's a lot of a choose-your-own-adventure story here with AWS. We try to give you native options like CloudWatch that tie into things like Lambda, all of our native compute services. It's one-click integrations that make your life easy. We also have some customers that are hyperscaled, running trillions of transactions and just insane volume. And a lot of what they turn to is things like our open source hosted offerings like AMP, which is our managed Prometheus option. So I would say as you're looking at all these, definitely rationalize what makes sense for you, your direction of your business, and also your level of comfort. I know many customers are in a multi-cloud experience and they need common tool sets, or they can't pay for licensing due to internal requirements, things like that. So really what we'll do is we'll step through this whole suite of tools. We're not going to go one by one, but we're going to look at 3 different patterns where you can see what observability does for your security benefits. Really, it comes down to a data story at the end of the day. So let's hop into those examples. So first, let's talk about strategy. Obviously, we need to understand what we're intending to achieve as we look at each of these domains. So collection is step 1, right? We can't analyze what we don't have. It's easy to drown at this step as well. So I would say avoid trying to boil the ocean, as they say. And let's take a look at what is the highest fidelity data that's going to tell you what you need to know and also help you answer the questions you have, right? Start by asking those questions of, what am I measuring, right? What does normal look like in my environment? And you only know that when you collect things from your environment. And observing is really more about laying in the business logic. If you don't know what's happening or you can't implement from a random stream of logs to a security question you may be asking yourself, like, is someone misusing my API, right? How would you know that? And we don't have a simple answer for you because the APIs are on your side of the responsibility model, right? We're trying to help you understand where and how the services need to intertwine with our telemetry coming off of them. And really, the action is the stage we need to get to, right? This entire continuum starts with what do we have, what do we need to know, and then what are the questions we need to answer about our environment. And we'll talk through a very specific implementation of this strategy. The other implicit challenge here is that we have modern applications that are a little bit different than what we're used to. It's not just a monolithic server in most cases. We have all sorts of independently scaling attributes. And the way that we used to monitor things, we need to understand when resources are coming into existence and disappearing. And what we found is also platforms from the partner standpoint, right? If you're operating a SaaS platform or you have multi-tenancy requirements, what does that traffic look like in an ideal situation? And what's great is when you get good at the security side of this, your entire business gets better. Your profitability gets better. You have better integrations. And you can ultimately build in security at each layer. And you can quickly understand when things are going wrong. So we'll talk about the why as well. So we're talking about 3 different threat cases here. These are very real things that I've walked through with customers. And I've actually worked, even following this talk when I built it the first time, I've used this consistently throughout the last year, so I hope it's really helpful to see what does real life look like. So use case 1, we'll look at a data exfiltration story with a service you're probably all using, like S3. 2 is going to be a serverless security example. Really, it doesn't matter what compute you're using, but we'll look at one specific implementation there. And then lastly, we'll look at a SaaS PaaS security example. And keep in mind, this is from the PaaS platform operator's standpoint. One of the really big challenges right now, and if you want to be competitive in the market, you need things like free tiers, right? You need to be able to give someone a login experience, give them an ability to use your product. But ultimately, if you can't do that securely, you can't tell who's a bad actor versus who's someone with good intentions. How do you qualify a lead versus have someone abuse your resources and make the internet a worse place? So really, that's kind of what we'll be looking at over the next 3 here. So let's talk about methodology as we look at these 3 lenses. One is implementing detections. We already talked about detecting metrics. But really, your logs are kind of worthless if you don't know what you're looking for, right? We need to actually see what is bad traffic, right? Fundamentally, we're looking at threat feeds. We're looking at things like guard duty, which do some threat intel for you. And as a partner, right, we have all sorts of partners like Fortinet or Proofpoint, other ones. That they're looking at malicious traffic as well. And what's really cool is guard duty just launched direct integration with our network edge using a technology we talk about called MadPod. So if you look at that launch from earlier this year, there's a lot of exciting stuff we're doing for you, and that's really the instrumentation side of things, right? With guard duty, it's one click, but with their custom apps, you have to be a little bit more prescriptive about what does good look like. The second point is really how are you consuming that data, right? Are you doing some sort of ETL process? Are you capturing it? Are you baselining? All those pieces are pretty unique to your business needs, and really need to they need to match the tenor of your organization. So things like QuickSight is great for a human to look at. Visualization is really the power here, and make that data useful, right? If you have all that data but you can't consume it as a human or as a machine, it's not going to do much for you, right? And then lastly, that's really the action phase, right? So automated response is great. What we advise is typically a security invariance approach, which is understand your environment. And if you see things that should never be the case, right? We never want to have Tor traffic or open ports to the internet, right? Like those sorts of things, you can automatically remediate those problems. So being able to solve those and not think about them really frees up your mental bandwidth, and it gives you more chance to focus on what's the data that's uniquely important to my organization. And as you can see on the far side there, we have things like EventBridge, config. Really, it's choose your own adventure here. So config is great because you don't need to build that whole layer of configuration management, resource timeline, all those other things, right? And then Lambda as well will scale with you, right? Whether you have one bad event or 50, right? A Lambda doesn't care how many times it's invoked, and you don't need to think about it anymore, which is great. So you do have to write code, maintain it, and make it useful for you, right? But the beauty of it is you're not just going to run out of Lambda because you have more events than you're planning on, right? So now we're moving into those real applicable use case stages. So let's take a look at the data exfiltration example. As you can see with S3, this is the data source that we're working with, right? We have things like CloudWatch that are capturing bucket reads, really all that network activity associated with buckets. But what's important to know is that as you look at the service itself, there's different types of data you have access to. So CloudTrail you typically get across the board around control plane, but data plane is really what's important here, right? If you know which bucket you care about, you can monitor the metrics on that bucket. If you have 1,000 buckets, it's probably a good idea to identify what are those 5 or 10 that are the can't lose sources of data in your organization, or things like logging, right? Like if you're logging to your common buckets, you want to protect the security controls that you're building and provide that integrity across your entire platform. The other thing, too, is config. So we talked about config a little bit, but essentially you should ask yourself, like, what would an insider threat look like if someone was trying to circumvent logging, right? Would they turn off certain things? Would they change keys on my bucket, right? All these things are really tabletop exercises that you should do with your business from a data standpoint. So let's talk about more of the motion phase here. So as we go into notifications, we have services like SNS, and with this notification service, you can pretty much do anything, right? You can text someone, you can do an HTTP call, you can go into a partner solution like ServiceNow. So really, this is designed to just route that information and watch it so you don't have to, which is the beauty of it. We also have the logging element here, right? So this is going to give you that access to what's happening in your environment, and you need to put your data there. And then we'll talk about the security services, right? This is where you would overlay something like GuardDuty, Security Hub, and Lambda. So as we look at this entire data exfiltration story, you can see that you need each phase here, right? You start with your resource. You have to know kind of what that looks like. And then you have to really look at the exhaust and the data coming off of those buckets. And then this Lambda, in this case, would look something like a notification. Really, ultimately, you could be changing settings in that bucket. But this really looks like a dedicated business-specific use case, right? You're going to have to know this workload to design for it, but all these tools give you the chance to do these things in a way that scales, right? Once you have this pattern, you can apply it to any bucket, and you can really tailor that business logic. And this is the observability, right? You can identify where it hits a threshold. The beauty of this, too, is you can set this up when there's nothing in that bucket, right? And you can just continue to watch it scale, and our tools will baseline them for you to help you identify what is anomalous over the long term. So let's hop into the second example. And again, this is based on a real example of a user with an API gateway and a WAF in front of it. So this is a pretty common model for a serverless function, right? You put your business logic in the Lambdas. Let's say you're processing payments or taking any sort of input, right? How would you know that someone's misusing your API gateway without instrumenting it, right? Fundamentally, we have to see what's the traffic coming in, what IPs are they coming in from, all these other challenges of like what you experience on the modern internet, right? If you put an open port on the internet, you're going to get traffic to it. It may not be traffic you want, but that's ultimately why we need things like WAFs. So the beauty of this, too, is that there's a few different ways that this model fails, right? WAF is really important because it's only as good as its rules. So that's the observability story. When you're working with a WAF, we have a lot of managed toolkits that you can use. So we now have things like bot detection and management. We also have the beauty of tokens that you can essentially give web tokens out and filter the ingress of traffic in your environment. So only taking traffic from sources you trust. Lastly, on the Lambda side of things, right? These three functions may be doing different things. If one is a payment processor using something like Stripe, you may not want to process the same payment 50 times for the same user, and they may actually be trying to waste your compute or cause problems for you elsewhere, right? Or the classic example would be if one of these is a fulfillment service, maybe you don't ship 50 PS5s to the same person because they found how to get to your path directly, right? So that's the beauty of the design of a system like this. So here's the observability lens, right? The best part of this is that everything that I talked about takes work. These are the things that work natively within our platform, right? If you were hosting us in EC2, you couldn't just click a button and get X-Ray integrated. X-Ray will look at like the tracing in your application. Is someone calling an expensive function like that Stripe API, right? Those sorts of things. The other beautiful part of this is Inspector. Inspector has gotten very good at identifying what's the software in your build, right? So an upstream supply chain dependency could essentially be pushed outside of your knowledge and built into your Lambda function. But observability is the way you detect that, right? Why is it doing something different that it's never done before? Inspector can help you answer that question. Lastly, this is the action stage, right? So let's say we do instrument it with all of those middle pieces. Ultimately, Security Hub is going to help you see that picture and not click through a bunch of management console windows across multiple regions. So this is really the follow-through motion of security, right? You could do all this detection, and it could be amazing, and you may do nothing with it, right? So the most important part is you have to take everything from collection to action. So that's where we have things like alarms and CloudWatch, and as well as Security Hub, where you can actually build response actions that are much easier to deploy by anyone in your organization, right? You may have multiple Lambda functions, with multiple owners, and you need something like a remediation action that's a part of Security Hub. So lastly, you may recognize this model if you've used EKS. Many customers I talk to are using EKS to operate platforms. So things like SaaS and PaaS are very common, as we all know, but there's a lot of software that comes with it. So this is a great example of observability that you need within Kubernetes. So if you're running a cluster, that's a big capital investment, right? There's a lot of ways that you can have other containers running or services you may not need. This is what can help you right-size and understand abuse. So as I've worked with some customers that operate developer platforms, if someone can sign up and use it, they may be using resources for bad things. So we see a lot of adversaries use things like Docker and Docker or proxy networks and essentially anonymize and misuse your resources. And ultimately, you can help catch that using things like GuardDuty because it understands the network traffic. The other thing that's very popular is OpenTelemetry. So I've seen a lot of customers use this as kind of a primary logging layer. And I would highly recommend getting that visibility from Kubernetes clusters and ultimately understand what's the total picture of things happening in your cluster. What I'll also touch on is Network Firewall. This is an inline product that essentially you can put between yourself and the internet. And we now have managed threat feeds that you can essentially pull in that threat intelligence, similar to how GuardDuty works, but it's actually in path of traffic. So you can identify, is traffic coming in that you don't want to allow? And also it gives you an enforcement point that you don't have with security groups. And then lastly, we have all of this other information that you get within your AWS account, right? So you have things like CloudTrail, CloudWatch metrics, and CloudWatch logs. And the beauty here is that you don't have to go and fish across your entire environment, right? You have like log groups, tailing logs live, right? This is kind of your operational view. And the beauty is you don't have to build dashboards to use that, right? You just jump right in the console, and CloudWatch really preps that data for you, puts it in one place. So we'll wrap up just talking about observability partners. At a high level, this is kind of where Jake specializes. We work with a lot of people that solve these problems as well, right? I think the beauty of what we do as a platform is we give you options that are natively integrated, but we also work with a ton of partners that also know our service as well and specialize. So if you look at things like Datadog, of course, they have a huge suite of capabilities there and even do things like build a cloud SIEM, for instance. So we also have service implementation partners because if you're looking at these slides and you're saying it's a lot to build and maintain, it's great to talk to people who've done it before. So would highly recommend engaging with these partners. We're over across the expo. Lastly, I would highly recommend checking out the CloudWatch training course. You may have seen that as a major theme. And I think that's by design, right? We want you to understand the one most common place to get all of that data, interrupt with alarms and logs and metrics. So the beauty there is that there's one place to look, and we have a workshop you can go through to train you on that. Well, thanks for coming, and really appreciate your time.